started here. Good morning. And welcome. Thank you everyone for being here. Versique's 10th HR Lab. And the topic, double digits. The topic of today is reimagining the impact of leadership collaboration. Thank you for being here. It's been a long time in the making. This was scheduled for back in March, and we pushed it out to today, so really appreciate everyone being here on this beautiful day. We have a great panel of speakers here, which we'll introduce in just a minute. But first, a couple of housekeeping items. First is around social media, so we have a giveaway. So as you are hearing things today, things that resonate with you, things that you find interesting, share that on social media, please. HR Lab, hashtag HR Lab, and we will randomly draw a winner who will get to choose a charity that will make a donation of $100 to. So, encourage you to be active on social media today. So a little bit about Versique. So first, my name is Jenna Eslick. I am the Vice President of Interim HR Solutions at Versique. So my team and I are focused on interim HR consulting. A little bit about Versique. We, as you can see up here, we do more than HR. So all of you, right, here brought here today for our HR lab. But you can see we have three different areas within Versique. So interim solutions, direct hire, and executive search. And as illustrated up here, we build your capacity across your business. So a number of different functional areas that we specialize in. And working with a variety of clients. Versique, we believe people make it possible. This is our HR team. So my leader, Chris Dardis, who sure all of you know, everyone knows Chris Dardis, and our amazing team, both on the interim HR side as well as our direct hire colleagues over here with Steve, Angie, and Allie. And a few shout outs that I would like to, I'd like to thank a few people for making this all possible. So first of all, our interim HR team, especially Jenny Kreha and Kim Gabriels for all of the planning that goes into this. Angela Wistersel, who is Versique's marketing team of one. Amazing of what she's pulled together, the details, the communication. So thank you, Angela. Chris Dardis, as our leader of interim solutions at Versique, and of course our owners of Versique, Tony Sorensen and Chris Ollendorf, for making this possible. Time and time again, right? This is number 10, and so we're putting on this free event for our amazing HR community, for all of you. And last but certainly not least, our speakers. So thank you so much for being here today. As you all know, we have two amazing organizations here, and we have Ethan Casson, CEO of the Minnesota Timberwolves and Lynx, Sianneh, Mulbah, Chief People Officer with the Minnesota Timberwolves and Lynx, and then with the Minneapolis Foundation, Milpha, Blamo, VP of Talent and Culture, and RT Rybak, President and CEO. So thank you so much for being here. With that, I would ask each of our speakers just to give a 1-minute intro of yourselves, please.
Should I start? Or?
Yes, please.
We always start first at the Minneapolis Foundation. Kidding. Good morning. Thanks for being here bright and early. My name is Milpha Blamo, and I am the head of HR, aka Vice President of Talent and Culture at the Minneapolis Foundation. I've been there for almost 5 years. Prior to that, my background is in HR operations and finance in the nonprofit sector. I'm also a mother of 3. My husband and I have been married 17 years, and we live in the beautiful city of Champlin.
I'm RT Rybak. I'm CEO of the Minneapolis Foundation, which is what it sounds like. It's a foundation, but it works around the world, actually, and very much locally in helping people determine their own philanthropy. So if every one of you wanted to be philanthropic and generous, you would come to us. They're advisors who help you make the money. We're the ones who advise you how to give it away. And it's harder than it seems and more beautiful than it could be.
Good morning, my name is Sianneh Mulbah, and I'm the Chief People Officer for the Minnesota Timberwolves and Lynx, and I just finished my 12th season with the Timberwolves and Lynx. We talk about our years in seasons, so we are starting our Lynx season pretty soon here, and I oversee all things people, culture, and I've been, prior to that, I worked in the nonprofit sector, very similar to Milpha, telecommunications, and also with tribal government. And I actually have 2 children, one who just finished his junior year in college, and an 11-year-old who keeps me busy.
Hey, good morning, everybody. My name is Ethan Casson. I'm the Timberwolves and Lynx CEO. I just finished my 7th season with our organization. I spent 6.5 years in San Francisco running the 49ers. And previous to that, I actually started my career as a basically paid intern with the Minnesota Timberwolves a long time ago. So although I'm not from Minnesota, when you start your career here in your early 20s, spend 10 or 11 years inside of an organization like I did, moved to San Francisco, met a Minnesotan who came with me, worked for the 49ers, and as I didn't realize this, if you meet a Minnesotan, they bring you back to Minnesota. She wasn't very honest about that from the very beginning. Nonetheless, we've been here for seven seasons, 7 years. We live in downtown Minneapolis, and we've got a son, Lucas, who's turning 2 here at the end of the month. So proud daddy right now.
Well, thank you. So the way this morning will work, I have some questions I'll be asking of our panel, and then around 9:15 or so we will transition to Q&A from the audience. So without further ado, really, just a comment on why this topic, right? Reimagining the impact of leadership collaboration. We all know that the expectations of HR have evolved over time. From my perspective, prior to joining Versique, I worked for a couple different organizations in an HR capacity, and always felt as though I was a strategic partner to the business. So I think even before COVID, right, when we know things changed and expectations changed of HR, I think that's been happening long before. But certainly COVID really escalated and highlighted, right, the need for HR and that importance of the partnership with the most senior levels of leadership within organizations. And so I think this is a very relevant topic. We always ask our partners and our clients, what topics are top of mind for you? And this was one. And so I'm really I'm happy that we're able to talk about such a relevant topic as we think about really the kind of the evolution of HR and the importance of that collaboration and that partnership. So my first question for our panel, and I should say the reason that we asked these leaders to be on our panel is because of how they partner with their organizations, right? So they're already very much living in this way and working in this way in terms of that collaboration between, right, presidents and CEO and HR. And so we really thought it would be interesting for this group to hear a little bit about how that's working at those organizations. So my first question, how would you describe that collaboration, right, between leadership, like most senior leadership at your organizations and HR? And how would you describe, like, how does that look? How would you describe how you work together?
So I think, Jenna, what you said, a partnership. So for us, it's truly a partnership. We don't miss our weekly one-on-one sessions, and we talk about everything, and we look at things from the perspective of our employee experience. And for us, that's coming down to a commission report. It's our culture, it's the engagement surveys that we're doing, and in all the decisions that we make. And our leader is very thoughtful in how he approaches people, so that makes the HR approach of our policies of what we feel is probably black and white, but when you put the more science and the people together, I think we are able to come to solid decisions in what we do.
And just to add to that, it's nice to know we're doing what the Lynx and Timberwolves do in terms of collaboration, but I think for us too, it starts even with those conversations and the strategy. And so I'm brought into those conversations from the front end and not sort of like as an afterthought. And I think it's helpful because if you think about it, right, HR, we're closest and more proximate to the people, to the day-to-day work. And so when you're thinking about your talent strategy and your culture, it probably makes sense to involve HR in those conversations from the onset. And so that's how RT and I, our senior leadership team, and I collaborate at the foundation.
I think the one thing I would add is that my conversations with Milpha need to be the safest and the most unsafe ones I have. Safest in that I don't have to worry as much about showing up as my best self. I can say I'm not sure. I can say here's a really weird idea and have the edges rounded off or not. So it needs to be safe, and then I need to let down my guard. But it needs to be unsafe, and that she really needs to get in my face, and she does. But no, and when we were interviewing folks, she made me the most uncomfortable, and I realized that's actually what I want. And so we have a very honest relationship in which we can bat things back and forth, and there's a pretty fair amount of humor in it too, but it's safe and unsafe, I guess is the best way to put it.
Maybe piggyback on what RT said, which is spot on. I think for us, the backbone is trust. I think that's what you're alluding to, is the idea that you could develop a relationship in this space and feel like you're in a trusted environment, so you can have a trusted conversation. And for me, at least stylistically, I always look at leadership, I always look at engagement with people as meeting them where they are. And for Sianneh and I, 7 years ago, when this journey began, it was really important for me to meet Sianneh where she was as a professional, where she was in the development, what her aspirations were for her career, the vision that she might have for our organization, some of the barriers that maybe had been put in front of her to not advance maybe some of the vision that she had for our organization, who she was as a person, who she is as a mom. All of those things, those kind of vulnerable things that sometimes are hard to get to, but by establishing that 7+ years or so ago, we can really know whatever the topic, whatever the subject matter, whatever the environment, whatever we're dealing with as an organization, internally or externally, because we have that backbone of trust that we've developed with one another. There isn't anything we can't talk about or anything we can't manage through.
I would say too, like the authenticity of our trust, like it goes down to my to-do list this week from my daughter, who's 11, was Ethan's opinion on where to get Jordans from. So it's like, it's genuinely, and like caring about who we are as people and just building that, like those difficult conversations are hard, like RT said, like we have conversations that you can't have with anyone else within the organization, and we're able to push back on each other, and with that trust, we know that it's all coming from a good place.
Yeah, and can I add to that? I will say now that you brought up trust, and we're going a little deeper, and RT just shared all that about our relationship. We've had some vulnerable moments, and if I didn't trust him, I don't think I would feel like I could have been and continue to be my authentic self, and I think vice versa. When you're dealing with people, especially in the wake of the pandemic and everything that has happened over the last, 5 years or so, and we're trying to figure out hybrid work and how to support staff in unique ways, those are some tough conversations, and I just really appreciate having that space to process things and what have you with RT and with our senior leadership team in general.
Thank you for sharing. So since you brought up vulnerable moments, I'm curious if you'd be safe place, but I'm curious if you'd be open to sharing, a time when there was a vulnerable moment, or you had a disagreement, right, that you had to work through, and what was it, and how did you work through that together?
Yeah, I can start. Because there's been a number of them, and I'm sure it's, this is not unique to RT and I, right? One of the things had to do with the vaccinations, right? And that policy, and putting a policy actually in place at the foundation. I think we were at different places with that. And one thing that I did appreciate with RT is that he just didn't say, okay, this is what we're gonna do and that's it. He was very respectful of my opinion and my perspective, and we spent a lot of time processing that. Similarly with becoming a hybrid organization, we had a difference of opinion in terms of how many days, to be in the office. And again, it's not only RT, but it's RT and our senior leadership team. And all of us just coming to some point of agreement was a little difficult, but we did it. And I think it has to do with trust and respect that we have for one another mutually.
Thank you. Usually what you say.
You want me to go first? Yeah, I mean, there's kind of a joke in your question, I think, or something that everybody's thinking in this room, which is every day there's something that comes up that you aren't going to see it the same way. I think that's kind of the point, as we all are trying to grow our organizations in and around DE&I, right? Some of DE&I is diversity of thought. A big part of diversity is diversity of thought, and so being in a room and an environment where you're having different points of view is critical to getting to what you hope is the right decision. And if we went around the room and had everybody talk about the last 3 years inside their organization, I'm not sure there's been 3 years that's been more painful, that's impacted more people on a personal and professional level than what we've all just been through. As a sports team, not just the pandemic, not just things that are painfully hard to manage through, like the murder of George Floyd that happens miles from where your office are, that happens in and around where a lot of your staff live. Management changes, things that play out on the court. I always say we're a family-owned business that's publicly traded, meaning everybody gets to comment on what we did or didn't do as an organization with regards to our players, our front office. So all the adversity and changes that happen in that environment, we've got to kind of unpack. We're in the middle of a transitional ownership change over the last 2 years and probably another year or so. So there's a lot of really intense subject matters and topics. And we have this kind of philosophy in our organization that we try to abide by as best as possible, which is disagree and commit. That spirit that let's have a heated debate or discussion. Let's be open enough to share what we think we need to be. And this is leadership in general, and Sianneh is at the front of this. Disagree and commit. If we get to a decision, we all leave the room committed to that decision. And that's, I think, sometimes where organizations, leadership teams break down, because it's either this is my idea, so we should do it, or this is what I strongly feel, so I'm slightly not in favor of what we're about to do, hybrid working, vaccinations, et cetera, et cetera. But the idea that a group of people can trust one another and say, we can disagree in this room, but when we leave this room, we commit to whatever we've decided to do. I think that's the really, really difficult place to get to, but I think great things happen from that kind of spirit.
If I want to go here. Do you guys know Phil Dunphy from Modern Family? So he thinks he's really cool, but people really, don't think he's so cool. I sort of, unfortunately, have a bit of that quality that I just sort of think everybody's going to be really cool and comfortable talking to me about every single thing. And Milpha is constantly reminding me in a very good way that what I really need to do is to let the process work, and that people will be a lot more honest with her than they will be with me. And I'll say, well, they never mentioned it to me. And she said, well, they're not gonna mention it to me. So we play that out in a lot of ways that I think, I'm reading your face here, I'm getting nervous.
No, I think that's right. And some of that comes with, obviously, I have to be a safe space, right? And there's things, and I'm glad you brought that up, because there are things that I have to hold that even RT as the CEO, right, can't know. And things that only he and I can know and no one else, right? Not even the rest of the senior leadership team. And I think that can be a little bit of a challenge as well, but that's the nature of our role. The other thing that's a little unique about our relationship, in case you have not noticed, we are two very different people. And Ethan, you brought up DE&I, and some of our conversations are like, RT, from the perspective of a black person or of a black woman, X, Y, and Z, and vice versa. He's like, well, from the perspective of who I am, and we have those conversations, and sometimes there's some levity, we have good laughs around it, but there's a lot of seriousness around the fact that he is supporting a staff of color, a woman of color, and there's a lot of unique needs that I have as a leader and as an HR leader, and he's been pretty supportive of that, and we try to support each other in that as well. So I just wanted to mention that too, that dynamic.
I don't think I have much to add to the items organized here, but I would say for us, I think something that comes up that is vulnerable is like staffing decisions and structures. And when it comes to people, they're the biggest variable that you don't know, and we each have different experiences with people. So making decisions on where to place people or who are the right people, I think those are some of the tough conversations. And going back to Ethan, we talk it out and have our opinions, but in the end, like, this is our decision, and just supporting that for each other and our leadership team. And we do that across the entire leadership team. So that one is, because we all have feelings about people, so that's hard to, not hard, but it's something that we have to differentiate.
Thank you for sharing. And I love that disagree and commit. All right, as you think about where your organizations are now and where you're headed, what is top of mind for you as leaders from an HR perspective? And what are you proud of that you're already doing in those spaces?
Well, as Ethan alluded to, we're going through an ownership transition, so just preparing for that, preparing our organization for that. It's exciting, it's nerve-wracking, there's a lot of unknown. So I'm excited that we're able to just like clear slate and really move forward in our structures. And we've been doing a lot. We always have to remember that, is we've done so much. When I started, we were more task-oriented and really moving into that strategic approach. But going forward, really getting into more of a strategic approach on our workforce planning, and thanks to Versique for helping us kind of with that thought process, and how we are identifying our people and how we're measuring competencies. And we're going through a revamp of our mission, vision, values, in which we all know as HR professionals, like, that's the base of who we are. So reintroducing that to the organization, it's starting from square one, right? What questions are we asking in interviews? What are we measuring in our performance reviews? Getting people to do performance reviews. So it's a little bit of everything, but it feels overwhelming, but in a nerdy way, it's really exciting. One thing I think we do really well is our people and the culture. We have a consistent engagement score of around 90% each year. So that we're doing really good there, but there's so many things that we can do better, and it really starts at that mission, vision, values.
Yeah, sort of along those same lines, I think with us, what's always top of mind is making sure that we can create an inclusive organization for everyone. And so over the last 5.5 years, we've really focused on diversifying our staff, which in my opinion is easy, right? Because there's no shortage of talent here in the Twin Cities, and we have a lot of highly talented folks. But I think the key is to make sure that you can retain those individuals, and in doing that, they have to feel like they belong. So that's always going to be top of mind, at our organization. One of the things that I'm personally proud about is you talked about performance reviews, and so we launched a new strategic framework about 3.5 years ago, and it's causing us to work differently, more collaboratively across the organization, and it caused us also to think about how we measure performance. And because we want everyone to feel tied and connected to our values, that's essentially what we currently have in place, is a more values-based performance review process. We just launched that this year, and it's a work in progress, but it makes me feel really proud because there's a lot of thought, and planning that went into that. So I don't know what you would add, Artie.
Yeah, and I want to go into those values because we developed a strategic framework about where we're going, and it has some values like proximity and internal mirrors external, which are nice things to put on a plaque on the wall. But then Milpha developed a talent and culture plan that really wove that in. So externally, what we do when we say that proximity matters is that instead of us sitting in the IDS center and say, where should we do a grant in the community, we trust the community members who are more proximate to the issues. Well, now take that internally. What does that mean? Well, what it started to mean is that every decision can't come from the top down. So we're really trying to build proximity, meaning trust those closest to the work. What that means in practice is that when we're building a new CRM system, that it really has to have the users determine it more than I do. when we are looking at how we manage, we're trying to really build the vice presidents in the organization to a much more empowered level. And not everyone is comfortable or used to that. And so part of, I think, my job, following the plan she has, following the values we have, is to push the decision-making closer to those more proximate, which sounds really easy, and it is really complicated as people look at their positions almost being turned upside down.
A couple things to add. A show of hands, how many folks work in an organization driven by revenue? Anticipated that amount of folks. Okay, so, for us, revenue inside of a professional sports team is our season ticket members, our corporate partners, our television contracts, our media partners, et cetera, right? And it's amazing, all these years, we've obsessed over the external experience. We call it the driveway-to-driveway experience. So the driveway-to-driveway experience for us is when someone leaves their home to come to a Timberwolves or Lynx game, what are we doing to influence that experience from the moment that that family or that business leader left to come to Target Center? What happens while they're at Target Center from an ingress standpoint, an egress standpoint, their food experience? What does the in-arena environment look like? Is it a clean building? Do they love the music? Are we hopeful that the outcome of the game goes the way that we hope the game goes, right? We look at every single component of that, and then we try to identify ways to create great value, right, and incremental value. And yet when we look inside the organization, we oftentimes skip a bunch of steps and we focus maybe a little bit more administrative based and a little bit more, we're gonna work on this, we're gonna work on this, we're gonna work on this. And I give Sianneh all the credit in the world, and what's really exciting about some of the work we're doing right now is we're looking at it as an employee life cycle. So if the driveway-to-driveway experience is how we're trying to anticipate the revenue side of our business, what are we doing inside the organization to identify the people experience? And that really is looking at the entire cycle of what an employee looks like inside of our organizations. And that starts from the talent acquisition director who's out recruiting for certain positions, to the offer, to what they experience their first week, their 30, 60, 90, the mentors that we try to connect them with, what's happening in that space relative to their reviews, their department heads, their engagement surveys, their performance reviews, their development plans, all of those things. We're really starting to just break down the cycle of an employee with the goal of retaining and developing, and making sure that we aren't missing a singular step. So a year after they've started with us, they could go back, like a customer could go back with us and say, there wasn't anything that was missed along this way. And I give all the credit to Sianneh and her team for really thinking of it in a way that actually makes so much more sense for our people in the organization. They understand we can't skip steps, because skipping steps means we're not going to be the organization we know we can be.
Thank you. That's great. So next question I have for you. So we've heard, how collaboration and what the partnership looks like in both of your organizations. But in organizations where perhaps the collaboration isn't as strong, right, between most senior leadership and HR, or where HR maybe feels like they don't have the ear of leadership or that seat at the table, how can those HR leaders influence the importance of that partnership?
I can start, and piggybacking off what Ethan just said, what my approach that I took was more of the understanding it from the business perspective, and our leaders are revenue focused. So that marketing approach is really what they understand, the numbers, the process, the customer experience. So really aligning our approach with that was helpful. And I actually read this book, CMO of People, and it takes that approach, looking at HR as the CMO. And when it comes to analytics, it's your market data, your people, the retention, and really having those words and including that kind of phrases in your conversations with the leadership team, I think is helpful, because that's something they look at every day. And so it's not reinventing the wheel, it's just making it relevant to what they do. And I think for me, we started off as a department of one in HR, and it was very task oriented. So it was just understanding the business. Like we're revenue focused, but we have like 8 different types of salespeople that work within our organization, and really understanding that. Like this week, I met with our SVP of ticket sales with my team and really broke down like what are they missing from us. Conversations, and not being so stuck in our policy ways that no, this is the right way, which they usually are, but being flexible in how we're taking that approach has really helped for us. We meet halfway and we get what we need to get done, but also taking that employee experience, there's so many different ways to relate that to what we really need to get done.
Yeah, and just to add to that, there is such a strong business case for that to happen, that partnership. And I frankly don't think it's the responsibility of the HR leader to make that case. I was looking at the registration list for who signed up today, and I was hoping there'd be more CEOs here and more leaders here to really understand how important this collaboration is. So if you're not doing it already, it's something that you put in practice. Just like you rightfully stated, and we all know this saying that culture eats strategy, right? Probably for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, right? And if you don't take care of your people and your people leader, and you don't partner with that person, you're not gonna be able to accomplish your goals and realize your metrics and your targets, right? And so I think the case is just really strong for that, and I hope that there are enough leaders and CEOs here in the room and watching virtually that where this point, about this collaboration really lands home with them. And they make that change if it's not already happening in their organizations.
Thank you. So my next question is for RT and Ethan. What do you value most about your partnership with HR? I think you've probably hit on some of this already, but can you give some examples of how you've leveraged your HR leader and your HR teams as a sounding board for some of the larger decisions you've made in your organization?
Yeah, great question. I mean, to me, and I'm just kind of thinking about this morning in the audience and Sianneh and I's relationship, I couldn't think of a moment in 7 years where almost any decision that I had to make didn't involve Sianneh. So when you ask the question, where was that moment that you needed your head of HR, your chief people officer, your partner to help as a sounding board, it's almost every single decision that I ultimately feel like I need to make. I like to build consensus, right? I'm a huge fan of that. I like to get in a room, as I talked about earlier, disagree, commit, and then leave with a belief that we're gonna go out and achieve whatever it is that we decided. But in the one-on-one kind of private space, I don't think I could think of a real decision that needed to be made where I didn't need or want Sianneh's point of view on it. Because she plays such a pivotal role in not just the outcome of that decision, but getting people to buy into why we're doing something. And you just alluded to this earlier, right? We're all a people-driven organization. No matter what product we're in charge of, whether we're for-profit or not-profit, whether we are in tech or not in tech, whether we could work from home for the rest of our lives or not, we are and will always be companies built with people and by people. And so the core of what we're doing and deciding on every single day is going to impact somebody, and it's going to impact somebody on a personal level. I can't think of a singular decision, real decision that needed to be made where, whether it was, the middle of the night texting Sianneh and saying, what do you think of this? Or our one-on-ones that oftentimes, I did pick out some good Air Jordans. Our one-on-ones that are scheduled for an hour with a really tight agenda that turn out to be 3 hours because we're constantly challenging one another to get to the best decision possible.
Well, I think Ethan said it real well. I can't think of too many decisions I've made without Milpha there. And, part of that, I guess, is form, but almost all of it is necessity, in that both Milpha's title is talent and culture. It's not just HR. I don't say just HR, that's critically important, but talent and culture is pivotal to how the organization works. And so there's been a lot of discussion for a while about whether she should report directly to me or not. I can't possibly think how I could run the organization without having a direct communication with a person in this role, and specifically Milpha, because it has really become really clear that a huge part of the strategy is being done with her and I together. And I just, it's not a step in a process just that I'm doing. It's I want to and I need to both, and it's just become part of the way the place works.
Thank you. All right, question for Sianneh and Milpha. How do you use your role to help influence the thinking or decision-making of your leader? Again, I think you've hit on some of this, right? And you talked a lot about, right, understanding the business, but would love to hear more on that.
I think one of our values talks about proximity, and I think RT alluded to that. And when I tell you he literally he believes in that, he will even jokingly say, and probably serious, right, that at some point I'm obviously your boss, but when it comes to X, you are my boss, and I listen to you, and so it's not too hard. And I'll normally say to RT, well, from an HR perspective, and that normally just kind of gets the job done. And so, so just being able to leverage my experience and background, and the fact that I am more proximate to our staff from a day-to-day perspective and the work that they do, I think that helps a lot.
I think from an HR perspective, usually gets the job done.
I think ours is fairly similar. We're the sounding board for a lot of individuals within the organization, and I have a team of 5 who are also their own sounding boards for different levels within the organization. So there's things that I may not experience that they experience that I can share with Ethan. The conversations that I have with my peers and our leadership team, I can then bring to Ethan when we're making decisions on things that he may not be as involved in or has a different perspective. So I think that is the most beneficial, just being that sounding board and being able to provide a different perspective when we're making decisions. And it's the people, right? Because we are very revenue focused. So being able to take that step back and think about, well, this would be how it affects this, this, and this. So that is, it's kind of fun to put all the pieces together.
Right. I'm going to ask one more question, and then we'll open it up for Q&A from the audience. So if you could challenge one cultural assumption about the relationship between HR and top leadership, what would it be?
Even the way you framed up that question, I think is and not you specifically, but that's a question I think that gets asked often. The idea that HR would need to be framed up, right, in an organization that is made up of leadership, but not made up of someone who's running HR, running our people efforts, that is part of our leadership, I think is, unfortunately we're not far enough along, and I'm speaking generally, than we need to be. And I'm hopeful a lot of people in this room have that relationship or are at a leadership position, or what RT just alluded to, which I wholeheartedly agree. There is no scenario, as long as I'm afforded the opportunity to work in professional sports and run a professional sports team or teams, that this position, Sianneh specifically, will report directly into me. The assumption that we would somehow or another have it be independent of leadership, when we've just spent the last 45 minutes or so talking about collaboration, trust, working behind the scenes to make an organization better at every single stage of that employee cycle, is one of those assumptions. I think this is an executive level position. I think it's a C-suite position. And that's how we've built it. I'm hopeful, and I see a lot of things changing. But that assumption in general is something that I think needs to go away as quickly as possible.
Well said.
Yeah, and in addition to what Ethan just shared, I totally agree 100%. One of the assumptions that I would like to challenge is, yes, we collaborate, we're partners and what have you, but I think a lot of times it's kind of like guilt by association. You're one of them. Yes, HR, we are one of them, quote unquote. However, we're still a safe space. And so a lot of times people think, well, I'm not gonna go and say something to her or him, in whatever case, if I don't want it to get to the CEO, if I don't want it to get to the leadership. And I really wanna challenge that assumption because, as HR leaders and practitioners, we still have to keep information confidential. And we know how to navigate conversations to share information that they need to know without disclosing any names and any pertinent information that can tie back to individuals. So that's just a real practical thing, but I think it is something that I would like to challenge because that is a general assumption about HR and leadership.
Can I add one more? You just triggered a thought, and this is Sianneh's credit. Even referencing it as in like HR, you know what I mean? It's an interesting terminology in the way we've described departments forever, maybe since the beginning of time, and it immediately suggests administrative, right? Even if we don't want to say that, that's kind of what it suggests. It's policy, it's benefits, it's some of those conversations that involve what's happening in the organization with people, their relationship with their boss, et cetera, et cetera. And what Sianneh has done and her team has done marvelously over the last few years is that this is a strategic partnership, right? They're building strategy. It just so happens that their strategy is built on the backbone of the people inside of our organization. There's a lot of administrative components to HR. There's no question to that, but it's a strategic partnership that we have living inside of our organization that's helping in a lot of different areas, inclusive of some of the things I just mentioned.
RT, anything you would add?
Well, I do want to amplify the point Milpha was just making about this is not a two-way relationship. She and I have a partnership. If that is seen as she's my tool to get information out of people, she's toast. Your credibility matters a lot, and so sometimes I buy Milpha a drink and try to get her to spill things, but she won't do it. It just pisses me off. But the fact of the matter is that's a really, really important partnership to do. So it's not necessarily code, but like you get your point across without, well, Russell Betts works for us. Like, could you go talk to Milpha?
Yes.
Okay, good. Would you tell me in a real world? I don't know. Yeah, anyway. But I mean, that's the whole point, is that somehow he's got to know that when he's talking to Milpha, she's the colander that gets the important stuff through it, but holds what doesn't. So, sorry to describe you as a kitchen implement.
No, that's what we call works, right? We work in HR, right? To Ethan's point, though, about being really intentional about even the title of our roles, and it's, that's actually what attracted me to this role at the Minneapolis Foundation, that it was talent and culture and not human resources. I love the transactional side, right? God bless all those that work in payroll and benefits, but you get to a point where you do want to focus more on the strategy, and especially based on your career trajectory and what you've learned over the years and where your passions, lie. And so I would just encourage everyone to really think about how you're labeling and how you're titling this position, because that helps in signaling to the rest of your organization, to your company, and to external folks the importance of collaborating with this individual. So.
Yeah, the only thing I would add would be, as HR professionals, just feeling empowered to make that switch from being transactional and HR, right? And becoming more of a strategic partner and feeling like grounded and solid in your approach in doing that. So breaking that cultural norm from ourselves and really pushing ourselves out there.
Love it. All right, well, we will transition now to questions from the audience.
That was a Stanford question right there. Thank you for the question. There's no question, since 3+ years or so ago, right, every part of how we build job descriptions, the metrics and the KPIs that we attach to those job descriptions, the quantitative and qualitative debates that we have internally have shifted. The paradigm has shifted completely. And And I think it's so critical at this juncture that we're open and comfortable with evolving. I mean, one of the things that we didn't really get a chance to talk to this morning, just based on time, is owning maybe what we were in the past, being open with one another that maybe that wasn't good enough, and then being excited about what the revamp process looks like, or reimagining some of the ways in which we've constructed departments, positions, the way we title, the way we communicate. And I think that's part of the exciting part too, is when you can get past that, gosh, I wish we had done it this way, or why are we late to get to this specific thing. The exciting part is about the reimagination of what an organization could look like moving forward. And deep in your question really is this willingness to go about your business differently than maybe you were willing to go about it 3+ years ago. Willingness to look at things at a different lens, looking in the mirror. In my particular case, you know, I want to continue to evolve. The only way I think I can lead, I think it's about being vulnerable to my staff, but being vulnerable to my staff is also saying, you know what, I don't know if we got this right. Or maybe we weren't looking at this the way that we needed to look at it, and let's so look at it a completely different way. So this reimagining, revamping is starting to kind of make its way through our organization. And a lot of what you just asked is kind of the process in which we're going through department to department, employee by employee.
Can I add to that too? The practice approach we're taking is like really truly identifying our competencies needed to be successful within our organization. Because we can train so much to get to that revenue piece, but just being on the same page as far as what those are is our transformation and our next step. And then adding into it a new leadership academy for people leaders that we're training them on how to be consistent and how to live the core values of who we are on a regular basis, so we can get to that quantitative piece of what we need to be a high-performing culture.
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say every organization in this room that isn't even associated with professional sports is and should be obsessing over the service component now more than ever. Revenue generating organizations aren't revenue generating organizations if the retention and service isn't at the highest level that it could ultimately be at. Challenging the way we've done things as the norm and pushing new ideas, innovative, more progressive ways in which we go about it is critical. And you know, one thing that's interesting about our organization specifically is and this is fascinating in professional sports. We're almost an organization made up of two different cultures. And I think that's likely true of many professional sports teams. There's the business side of it, the leadership side of it, the front office side of it, players, and the coaching staff. And what we're trying to do is merge these cultures into one singular space. And that's really difficult to do if you think about the amount of turnover you have in a front office, a coaching staff, with players that are coming and going, et cetera, et cetera. So we're in the middle of really working collectively to try to determine what is the Timberwolves and Lynx way. When you interview with us for a marketing coordinator position, is the questions you get asked the same questions that Anthony Edwards might have gotten asked before we drafted him in the draft a couple years ago? And the answer should be somewhat similar. If we can get to the place, the holy grail in our organization of consistency of this mission, vision, values, exercise, is can the answer be the same when we're out trying to recruit a free agent as it would be trying to recruit somebody to run our business intelligence team, or at least the line of questions. But the servicing piece right now is a critical component to it. We can't advance, we can't move forward unless we've stabilized our business coming out of so many different things. We've all dealt with these headwinds, and that's at the core of what we're focusing on right now.
Mass would probably be the same thing in our world, right? Because it impacts the member experience, the fan experience, but it also impacts our staff, like their health and safety when they're in the arenas. And fortunately for us, right, that directive was coming from the NBA, so it was how we were applying it, how we were communicating it, but then how we were living it within our own office. I think that that was kind of controversial internally as well, right? So that is definitely a policy that we implemented there. We also, being a part of a very progressive league, we have stands, we stand on things that other organizations don't do or aren't comfortable doing. So it may not be a policy, but it's who we are, and sharing an opinion on George Floyd or other things that are happening in our world. So it is controversial with our fans, but also for other fans, it's like it puts them at peace, right? And internally as well for our employees. One of the things we're trying to identify now is like, what do we recognize, right? There are probably 500 honorary days in a month, and like how do we, what heritage months do we recognize? So I think once we get to identifying that, that could be controversial, right? Do you highlight a religious holiday? Just so many things that we have to make decisions on, and those are the conversations that like those do get vulnerable because we all have our opinions on things.
Never had that situation.
No, if others do.
Right, no, I'm totally kidding. That's, that's the nature of, working with, highly talented, unique individuals. And it really is a skill. And I think you kind of answered that as well, because what I do is I bring it back to the fact that this is not about me, it's not about you, it's about the organization. And I think we're not unique in the fact that on our senior leadership team, outside of our team, we have 2 other SVPs, and they're all 3 very unique individuals, highly talented, skilled professionals. I love working with all 3 of them. But they're also individuals, and so you, as a leader, you have to be adaptive, right? And kind of cater your conversations, and there's different dynamics maybe on their team, and different things that they're thinking about as it relates to them and their team. We have a chief impact officer that's over impact, right? And a SVP over philanthropic services. We're all collaborating to have collective impact, but at the end of the day, there's unique needs on each team. And so a lot of my conversations will be about what they need uniquely on their teams. And so just being able to bring it back up to the high level and say, hey, we're looking at making changes that would not only impact your team, I hear what those needs are, but that will impact the entire organization. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Yeah, I think one easy thing that I think about is just keeping the main thing when you're having those conversations, and just reminding our senior leadership like that maybe in that position that we're on the same team, right? Same team, we can have these vulnerable conversations, but in the end, like the main thing is the main thing. So it's difficult, and I can probably think of a few things that we've had to work through, but we always get there in the end.
I don't think we necessarily are. We have regular check-ins, but Milpha and I text or phone or email a lot of different ways. It may not be the perfect thing, but we've sort of gravitated into a way of doing that, the advantage of that is that it allows us to, you're a certain way when you're showing up for a weekly meeting with an agenda, and you are also a certain way when you're just bouncing ideas off each other during the day or week. I find that actually pretty helpful, because it allows us to get outside of our sort of, I am now the CEO, you are leading talent and culture, and just kind of like 2 people talking about what we need to do. I don't necessarily recommend it for everyone. It just kind of seems to work for us. I don't know what.
And I agree, just to add to that, if there are just things that I want to make sure that he hears and doesn't forget, I'll start with those. So RT, just real quick, I want to make sure you know about these 5 things, and then we kind of go into other things. But to Ethan's point, I think we have 45 minutes technically blocked off on our calendars, but it's never a 45-minute conversation, right? It's always longer, so.
Yeah, I think ours average 2 to 3 hours, and they're scheduled for an hour. The way I structure my agenda, I try to have that planned in before I go, but it's more on starting with the things that I need his opinion on and that we talk through, or maybe some like more buy-in so that he can start filtering it into the rest of the leadership team. And I try to move away from more of the updates in that conversation, because I want it to be a conversation, right? It's like just to be helpful to get us to get through the things that we need. Just really starting with those conversation starters, that if it's a policy or opinion on the summer Fridays that we have. So if we also do weekly updates every Friday. So if there's something that everyone needs to know, that just goes out. So you kind of keep that out of your one-on-one and use those 2 to 3 hours for the important stuff.
I think I just would add, is it 3 hours?
I'll make sure I eat before we go.
For me anyway, when we're in that environment, and Sianneh just described it perfectly around kind of let's focus on the things that we need to get done either in an immediate fashion or that are critical to something that's happening inside of our organization. I try not to forget, and I don't think I forget very often, relative to the wellness of Sianneh and the wellness of her team. And I think oftentimes because, you know, what these roles are doing is looking after so many different things in our organization that involve our people. And at times it can get very heavy. At times it can be very stressful. And our relationship, if you can't tell, is certainly on the lighter side, and we're very comfortable with one another. But I do want to know how she's doing. And that might just be how your weekend was. That might just be, how are the kids? How's Chris in college? How's your mom doing? You just bought a new house. Tell me about it. I want there to be a human connection to it, so Sianneh doesn't lose sight of the fact that that trust that we built over the last 7 years, that personalization that's established, is the reason why we're able to do the things we're able to do. And not having that, and it's not scripted. There's not like I make personal notes to say, you know, what did Sianneh do on Sunday? How was soccer practice with Liv? But I think there's something organic and natural that happens with a friendship, a partnership, and checking in on how are you? How's your team doing? What's going on in your world? Maybe that's why it's 3 hours long. I don't know that I'm thinking about it. But there is that component to it, and I agree with everything else everybody said here.
From the HR leadership, I actually just shared some job descriptions with Ethan on like an internal communication, like the PR, because really the branding of who we are, and that has to live in everything. So I think PR is very important. We're trying to be better on how we share who we are just organically on our LinkedIn, and that is another form of our DEI approach, right? So it's very important for us and something that we can definitely, it's an opportunity.
I just wanted to add, I think that question is very timely, because one of the things that RT has been like, Milpha, let's go a little bit further with our talent and culture plan. We realize that this is something that's unique to the Minneapolis Foundation, and so we want to share more broadly about it. And so we just engaged a consultant literally like a few weeks ago to help us come up with a way to really articulate that and share it broadly. So more to come on that. Anything else you would add? Yep. I think patience, it's really important, and RT really has that, and also allowing me the autonomy and flexibility, right, within how I do that, and not having a lot of hard deadlines and putting a lot of pressure on me, and knowing kind of like to Ethan's point, and I didn't want to mention that, but a lot of our check-ins can be, emotionally driven because of everything the two of us are holding, and so we've laughed, cried, everything together, and I think RT realizes how much I have on my plate, and so just being, it's maybe not a skill per se, but just that support is really important, because I can't pour from an empty cup. There's no way I can drive all of that in our organization, get the buy-in, do this, that, and the other, if I'm not in a place where I am taking care of myself. And so him being supportive of me doing that has been really helpful.
I think the collaboration and really being like the attentive listener and listening to the things that we are describing and just that people approach I think is very important. Aside from just that, the empathy and authenticity that is more of behavior, I don't think I'd add much to that. People are like I mentioned earlier, like just making those decisions. And I also mentioned that our engagement scores are fairly high, but it's like digging down into the areas that we're consistently lower on and being able to have those conversations and managing out the pieces that might not fit into that culture that we want to be and that we are. I think that's difficult, right? And just getting to the point where we're comfortable maybe telling someone they're not that great, and still doing that with empathy, because of who we are is we're really like just people focused and leading with empathy, so just driving culture based on that. It gets difficult.
And I think with us, we have these stated values that we take very serious, and from day one, during the interview process, we talk about our values, and it's one of our questions, because there has to be cultural alignment as well as understanding how to do the work and the role. And so I think that has it's been an interesting evolution, because we had stated values in the past, but I think these are stronger, these are more explicit. When you start talking about equity being a responsibility, and change is personal, I think just the transition to where people feel like they can truly lean into these values has been a little challenging, but we expected that. And so there's things like the performance review process that we've just launched to help people come along with that evolution, so in that transition.
Yeah, I think as HR professionals, we're also like the change leaders, and it's tough because you want it to work now, and just having that patience and maybe explaining the same thing over and over again and reminding, so that definitely gets to be a challenge, but in the end, it will balance itself out.
I think one of the things that has woken a lot of people up to this is the talent shortage. And there isn't a leader right now in any organization that shouldn't be thinking about that, and I would assume most are. So when you reframe HR and talent and culture, you're really moving away from the message that it's this thing over here to the talent and culture is a fairly accepted concept of being central, and has never been more central in organizations. And so I think that's a part of it. I also think there's a really exciting part of it for a leader that moves beyond compliance into how to get on the same side of the table as the talent in your organization, and how to really develop either collectively or individually a path for everyone to grow their role there. One of the challenges in our organization, and I'm going to just project in yours, is in our field we are at the very top of our game. There aren't too many jobs in philanthropy that are bigger in this market than ours, and certainly in sports. How do you get bigger than the NBA? I mention that because really what you have to think about is there's not a lot of ways to continue to grow within our organization, or unless we are unpacking our titles and our responsibilities and really thinking, how can this person build a career, not staying in place, growing in the same organization? That is not a simple thing. And I think getting executives excited about the fact that they can deal with the fact that they won't have as big a transition, and that they can actually grow talent, I think is something that's very different than saying, how do you feel about payroll, which is critically important, right?
Yeah, I would say too, like taking off of RT's comment on talent acquisition, from the HR professional's perspective, being able to put that into terms of like, this is how we can build that revenue a little bit quicker. So I think on that question, it could be the HR professionals kind of challenge to themselves, okay, I'm gonna show my value and here's how, and really taking that weight off of the leader and starting piece by piece. Because if you explain everything that you're gonna do at once, it probably isn't going to be understood or heard, or just it wouldn't get implemented as quickly. So I tried that on Monday with a whole process, and it's just easier if you just start at the beginning.
I'll also add to answer your question that you also have to have the right person in that role. I think I shared earlier that the title attracted me to the job and the nature of the work, but there are some human resource professionals that are content and prefer the more transactional side of HR, and that's okay. And so if you have that individual that doesn't really prefer that level of collaboration, that's fine. So I don't think you should project that. I'm not talking to you directly, but giving advice, I don't think that a CEO or a leader should project that onto that individual. I think it's a conversation about what that shift looks like and if that person's willing to be a part of that. So.
Wow, I mean, a lot. But you know, Milpha is a lifelong learner, so she's just gotten a master's, right? Yeah, doctorate, sorry. But it was a very masterful doctorate that she got. But she's constantly bringing me books, and she just went to a really wonderful program at Harvard, brought back 2 books to give to me. She's sort of my school, and so I don't know where to start or stop on that, but an awful lot. In addition to that, her life experience and human experience and my life experience and human experience are different. And we are able to put both of those in the table, center of the table, and really, really be able to navigate all of those together. She borrows from my life experience and vice versa, and so along with the academic thing, I think as a human being, she's incredibly valuable to me.
Congratulations on the doctorate. I think what our team just said, specific to a singular expertise, I can't. There's too many. Yeah, I mean, if it was a singular expertise, we wouldn't be the company that we are. If it was a singular expertise, I feel like from my seat, I would demand more of that position. If it was a singular expertise, we'd be back to calling it HR and not a people-driven, strategy-driven area of our organization. So there's, and I don't want you to get too cocky here, but there's so many different things, tangible and intangible, that Sianneh and her team bring to me and the organization. And I said this earlier to a question, that this idea that we're in this reimagining, revamping kind of mindset, this growth mindset. I love that when Sianneh and I can sit down in a 7.5-hour one-on-one meeting on Mondays, that we're both really inspired by having a growth mindset, right? That we're comfortable with, maybe there was a level of expertise in a certain space that's changed, right? That wasn't what it was 3 years ago. I certainly think we all would agree with that. So it isn't a singular thing, it's that Sianneh's willing to continue to subscribe to a growth mindset, subscribe to reimagining and revamping, and then that's contagious. If you've got your chief people officer and a person that's driving your organization on so many different fronts who believes and subscribes to that every single day, that's contagious with 200 plus people. And that's contagious at a leadership level, as we're in the middle of business planning right now and making sure we have macro goals and objectives that we're trying to get to. We call them organizational priorities. We boil it down to goals and objectives, KPIs, action items inside of each department. But every time we do this exercise, there is a human resources, people-oriented organizational priority or 2 of the 4 to 6 that we pick on an annual basis. That says to the organization that this is as important as anything else we do in this upcoming year.
Thank you so much. So that is going to wrap up HR Lab for today. A huge thank you to our speakers. Your openness, your authenticity, your vulnerability. Thank Thank you all to being here. We certainly appreciate you coming out, taking time out of your day to be here. Great questions. We have this space until 10 o'clock, so if you'd like to stick around for some additional networking, feel free to do so. And also, just a reminder, there were so many great takeaways. I have like notes and notes here. Please remember, share on social media, #HRLab. There's so much good stuff we want to share with others. So thank you again.